G'day guys, this is Tier and welcome back to another Fallout 76 build video. Today I've got a very special edition for you guys. To help celebrate the launch of the new playable Ghoul update, I've teamed up with Bethesda to bring you all an all-included sponsored build guide. That's right guys, it is my sincere honour to present the channel's very first and only sponsor, Bethesda themselves. Let's do them proud and do what we do best here on this channel and showcase some incredible builds for the new Ghoul Within update. As always, timestamps will be on the screen so that you can find your way around the video easier. And for this one, I thought that for the first of my many Ghoul builds, we'd go back to an old favourite playstyle of mine, that being melee, and see what breath of fresh air Ghoulification can bring to it. And this build is the Ghoul melee build, better known as the Radzerker melee build. If you want to get down and feral and really make the most out of your new glowing and feral abilities in an up close and personal fashion, ripping and tearing your way through the wasteland with a smile on your face, then the Radzerker is the go-to for you. Now typically my build videos do go heavily into the details, but for convenience sake I'll be brushing over a lot of the more basic build explanations and really focusing on giving a more complete overall explanation towards the new Ghoul features and how that makes the build unique over its human counterpart. So with all of that said and out of the way guys, let's jump into the build. We're going to kick things off with these special stats. Okay guys, the special perks for the Radzerker are as follows. This is what you'll want to utilize for the base special stats. So we are making use of 3 fully maxed out legendary special cards, just throwing that out there right now. I'll let you know what they are and what I've used in a moment. But for your base special stats, we want 10 strength, 2 perception, 10 endurance, 11 charisma, 3 intelligence, 15 agility, and 5 luck. This is what you will need to utilize to make the Radzerker build in its fullest and most complete form. So for myself, I am using the legendary special cards of Strength, Endurance, and Luck, which will bring my Strength to 15, Endurance to 15, and Luck to 10. Now you can utilize any one of the legendary special cards, whichever one you want, just so long as you've maxed out at least 3 of them, and you adjust your special stats accordingly to be what I've just stated there. And finally, for the special stats from there, if you do everything that I tell you to do in this build guide, then your special stats should be looking like the following right here. 37 strength, 6 perception, 19 endurance, 1 charisma, 1 intelligence, 13 agility, and 14 luck. Now all of these will be boosted by 1 if you are on a team. However, currently I am not, and obviously since we are a Ghoul, Charisma is down to 1, and because we're not using Unyielding, since we are a Ghoul, that means that unfortunately we don't get to make use of a plus 15 to basically every special stat. But that's fine, we don't need it, we've got some amazing Ghoul abilities to make up for that. And now let's get into the perk cards, mainly the Ghoul perk cards, since that is what you're all probably here for, to see how the Ghoul version of my melee build, the Radzerker, differs from my human build, the Queen Killer. So let's get into it and start off in strength. We'll be brushing over all the human ones. We've got Barbarian, Iron Fist, Incisor, and Martial Artist. All of those will basically just make us more powerful with their melee or unarmed weapons and make us tank a lot more hits for the melee playstyle. As for Ghoul perks, the first one is Radioactive Strength. So we're going to max this out. It's very important that this one is maxed out. We will expend a moderate amount of glow to deal 150% more damage with power attacks and bashing. Power attacks is very important. That's going to be the main crutch with this build. We will want to be power attacking as often as possible, and this build complements that really well with high AP regeneration and a high enough AP pool with buffs, which lets us dish out power attacks back to back to back. So Radioactive Strength is a very important perk card. From there we have Brick Wall. Basically when your glow is high, which it always will be because of a few little tricks, we are immune to staggering attacks, which is just such a chef's kiss. Amazing quality of life perk and ability to have. So we're definitely going to be taking that one. Brick Wall will cap us out and utilize all 15 points in strength. Now before we move on, you might notice I'm not using Blocker, and I'm not using any one-handed or two-handed perks just yet. Obviously you can switch in Gladiator or Slugger for Iron Fist if you do decide to use a one-handed weapon or maybe an auto axe. I'll show variations in the future in the weapons section if you want to use an auto axe for this build. But I think this build works its best when you're using an unarmed weapon, hence the Iron Fist perk. And the lack of blocker is because we're actually very tanky without it. And since we are a full health build with the radiation overshield essentially, we don't really need to tank any more damage on top, so we can afford to lose this one and take some other perks in strength. Next up we have Perception, and we've only got one perk in here, that being Radzerker. Dealing non-automatic melee damage provides a small amount of glow. Now this is actually very, very nice for the build, and it also goes hand in hand with one of the legendary perks we will be picking up. Basically, all of our Ghoul glow abilities will consume a little bit of glow or radiation from our health bar with every attack or every time we get attacked or what have you, whatever case it may be for the perk. This perk, Radzerker, negates that a little bit and makes our glow go down slightly slower, because every time we're actually in the fight attacking an enemy, we're getting glow back. Every punch we dish out, every knife slash, every swing of the hammer, whatever you're doing, as long as it's not automatic, will give you a little bit of glow back. So Radzerker, very, very important to have on the base version of this build. Obviously, if you're going to be using an auto axe, it doesn't really matter. Next up, we have Endurance. The human perks are Life Giver, Solar Powered, Fireproof, and Starch Genes. Obviously, we know why we're taking majority of these. Life Giver and Fireproof will make us a little bit more tanky. Solar Powered will give us a little bit more strength and also health during the day. Obviously, you could switch out Solar Powered for something else, but since a lot of the good endurance perks are locked off from ghouls, there was nothing else there that really stuck out to me, if I'm honest, so Solar Powered it is for now. As for the ghoul perks, we have Radiation Power first up. Expend a small amount of glow per hit to deal 20% bonus damage to targets. So this is basically the same thing as Radioactive Strength, except it happens with every attack instead of just power attacks. We're going to add that 20% on top of the 150%, so every power attack we dish out is going to be dealing 170% extra damage for a small amount of glow. And obviously every time we punch something, we get a little bit of that glow back. And obviously we can be healing ourselves with toxic goo and other sort of radioactive materials, so we can keep that glow in a very tip-top shape all the time with no dramas at all. So yeah, basically just free damage. Radiation Power, we're going to need that perk. From there we have Glowing Gut. This feeds into everything I just said. Our main way of keeping our glow up, which I'll show later in the video, is toxic goo. You can hold a lot of it, it weighs almost nothing, and it gives you the largest amount of radiation in a pinch. And this perk right here increases that large amount of radiation by 300%. Just quickly to show you guys, so without the perk, I've taken it off. Toxic goo gives you 50 rads, toxic water gives you 30 rads, and spoiled Brahmin milk also gives you 30 rads. These three are probably the most common consumables to give yourself radiation, so those are the examples I'm using. And now with the perk back on, toxic goo jumps from 50 to 198 rads, and the spoiled Brahmin milk and toxic water go up to 119 rads. So that is a very useful perk card. Next up we have Charisma. So the human perks are Stranger Numbers, Suppressor, and Tenderizer. Now Suppressor and Stranger Numbers, fairly obviously why we're using those. Suppressor does also combine with a ghoul perk that I'll show in a second, which is very nice, and I think it helps keep us alive when we sacrifice our survivability in other areas. Tenderizer, however, I do have to explain a little bit. So this was buffed a little bit in a technical way. Now this perk is a lot more of a team play perk, so every single person in the whole server on your team should be using Tenderizer because it's more of a global thing now. Everyone contributes with this perk. So every attack you do on an enemy, that's going to make that enemy take 0.1% more damage, and that can stack up all the way to 100%, I think. So obviously if you're alone, this isn't going to do all too much for you, but in those boss fight areas and in the raids, not that you'd take a melee build into the raid, but you know what I mean, Tenderizer will be very valuable there and can rank up really quickly, especially if you combine it with Furious and Pounders. And now the ghoul perks. First up we have Feral Presence. So this is what combines with Suppressor. So, while feral, which we are on this build, this is a feral build, you wouldn't have a melee ghoul build without being feral, you reduce your target's damage output by 30% after you attack for 5 seconds. 30% plus 30%, so we're going to take 60% less damage every time we're attacking something, and while we're attacking, we're going to be regenning our glow with Radzerker, and obviously if you don't know, every amount of damage you take removes your glow a little bit. So technically Suppressor and Feral Presence go hand in hand with keeping our glow topped up so long as we're attacking the enemy. So that's just pretty nice overall. From there, we also have United Ordeal. While in a team with another ghoul, you gain +3 to all special stats. While you're on a team, and as long as there is a ghoul there, all of those special stats will be increased by 4, since we have the Stranger Numbers effect and that one mutation, as well as United Ordeal. This perk is just amazing. It kind of makes us not having unyielding a little bit more bearable. Moving on to Intelligence, we only have one perk card in here. Funnily enough, there's only one we need in here, and I'll explain why in a second. We have Science Monster. While you have Glow, which we always will, you gain 15% bonus damage for 10 seconds upon getting hit. Now we're melee, we are a melee build, so we're probably always going to be getting hit. Okay, so that's basically a permanent 15% damage increase for us with Science Monster. We're going to be in the fight, swinging at everything, and everything's going to be swinging back at us or shooting at us, so that's just a free 15% extra bonus damage for 10 seconds while we're getting hit. From there, let's go to Agility. The human perks are Action Girl, Evasive, and Adrenaline. Obviously, you know why we've picked all of these. We want faster AP regen. That's just going to be massive for this build in particular with all the power attacking. Evasive, just for a chance to take no damage whatsoever. That's going to be massive for us. And Adrenaline, obviously, more damage for each kill we get, maxing out at 60%. Awesome. Can't say no to that. The Ghoul perks, however, we have Action Ghoul. That combines with Action Girl / boy to give us even more AP regeneration, which we will sorely need for this build with all the power attacking. So those two perks, amazing for the build. On top, we have Hyper Reflexes. This combines with Evasive. When your glow is high, which I keep saying, it always should be, you gain a 20% evasion chance. And obviously it goes without saying that the higher your evasion chance, the more likely you are to avoid all incoming damage, which just means that the glow will not be consumed. So that's amazing. Hyper Reflexes and Action Ghoul, must-haves for this build in particular. Moving on to luck, the human perks we have are Bloody Mess, Grim Reaper Sprint, Ricochet, and Junk Shield for the human perks. All of these are pretty stock standard. Bloody Mess will give us more damage. Grim Reaper's Sprint will give us a 35% chance to restore all action points if we're using VATS, which we will be most likely, because every time we sprint while using VATS, it automatically counts as a power attack. So yeah, Grim Reaper's Sprint is absolutely brilliant for the build. Ricochet goes without explanation. It's just a % chance to deflect ranged attacks, which is the same explanation I gave for Evasive and the Hyper Reflexes perk. Just a chance to take no damage or less damage. We're going to take that all day long. Junk Shield as well, just get more resistances. We can't say no to that, it's only 1 point. And all you need to cap it out for the junk side of things is just put 100 volt steel scrap on your person. It weighs only 5 pounds and it gives you a whole bunch of resistance. So yeah. And finally, the last perk and the last ghoul perk we will be using on this build is Faulty Spots. Weak point damage is increased by 15%. This is the first time we've had a perk or anything in the game that will give you a direct boost to your weak point damage. For those that don't know, weak point damage is specifically categorized by the yellow number that comes off of an enemy. So that's most of the time headshots, but it can be the belly or maybe the tail on certain creatures, but most of the time it's a headshot. So basically, headshot punches, which are a thing in this game, will be doing 15% more damage. So yeah, aim high when you're punching and you'll be doing extra Faulty Spots damage. And that does it for the perk cards and the ghoul perk cards, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry if you're not used to the way I've skimmed over all of the human perk cards, but this is a ghoul build and I want to mainly hone in on those new perk cards. And this build as a whole is mainly centered around utilizing the ghoul abilities to keep our glow high and utilize power attacks to dish out massive amounts of damage. With all that said, let's move on to the legendary perk cards. So first up, we have Hack and Slash maxed out. It's a 50% chance for melee VATS attacks to do area damage. Basically, whatever damage you're going to do on your main target, if you're using VATS and this procs, then all that damage is spread around you in a nice cleave ability, which can lead to you taking out multiple foes in a single punch. Next up, we have Taking One for the Team. This is basically a free 40% extra damage boost. It works even when you're on a team all by yourself in a public team. So yeah, there's no reason not to take this. All you have to do is let an enemy hurt you and you do 40% more damage to them. This also goes inside with the Ghoul perk, Science Monster. So basically, we're getting 55% extra damage every time we get hit. And I've already explained the legendary special cards that I'm using: Strength, Endurance, and Luck, bringing my base Strength from 10 to 15, 10 Endurance to 15, and then 5 Luck to 10. And then finally, one of the new perk cards is the Feral Rage perk card. This is the only new Ghoul legendary perk card that we will be taking, because when you are feral, which we are, all glow perk abilities cost 50% less when it's maxed out. That's going to be incredible. It's going to keep our sustain on our glow in tip-top shape. Even only having it leveled out at rank 1, I notice it dramatically, and all of my glow abilities go down and drain the bar a lot less, and I'm able to fill them up a lot easier with Rad Reaver and Toxic Goo. So when I max this out fully, or even get it close, it's going to be a very phenomenal perk to use on the build. And then from there, obviously we are a feral ghoul, so we have the debuffs of minus 30 AP, minus 30 HP, minus 99 Charisma, and minus 5 Endurance, as well as 300% less gun accuracy, which doesn't matter, we are a melee build after all. But to make up for it, we now deal 150% extra melee and unarmed damage. Now, all of these minuses might look scary, but the minus max AP and HP and Endurance don't actually matter that much. We can still sprint around all we like to close the gap on our enemies. We can pair attack all we like if we have a high enough AP regen. And obviously we have buffs to bring up our HP and AP anyway. And obviously the 99 charisma thing might look scary, but that doesn't matter at all. And with that covered, let's move on to the mutations for the build. We will definitely want to be a carnivore. This will times 2 the benefits from our meat-related food buffs. So that's going to be fantastic when we're taking buffs that will increase our strength or our melee damage in general. We're going to double that, and it's going to make us a whole lot more powerful. The chameleon mutation doesn't really matter. If you decide to take off your armor, you're going to be invisible. That might be nice, it might not, you might find it annoying. Either way, you can use it or not use it. Next up, we have electrically charged. We're a melee build, so we're going to be up in the fight. We're going to be getting hit, so that's a 40% chance to deal extra damage back to enemies. Why not? It's free damage if it does proc. Grounded we're going to be taking because we're not using energy guns, so that's basically a free 100 to our energy resistance. Then we have herd mentality. That is a +2 to every special attribute that we have, and then that moves up to a +3 so long as we're on a team with other players. Next up we have marsupial, a must-have for every build, more carry weight and a massive jump height increase. There's not a build in this game that doesn't use marsupial. Plague Walker doesn't actually matter because we can't get diseases, so unfortunately for right now that's kind of a dud mutation for a ghoul. I think they might change that in the future, so I'm keeping it for now just in case. But as of right now, Plague Walker literally does do nothing for you if you're a ghoul, so use it or don't use it. Hopefully it changes in the future. Speed Demon is up next. This is going to make us move 20% faster. And since we are a ghoul, there is actually no downside to Speed Demon. We don't get hungry or thirsty, so that negative doesn't matter. It's just a free movement speed increase. Talons is up next. We are an unarmed melee build, so every time we punch something with a power fist or an industrial gauntlet or whatever you're using, you're going to be dealing 25% more damage, and you're going to be dealing 25 bleed damage over 5 seconds, which is a nice little booster to your damage. Twisted Muscles on top, just for 25% extra melee damage if you use a one-handed or two-handed weapon, and also we get that chance to cripple with everything we attack. And the final mutation is Unstable Isotope, same reasoning as the electrically charged one. This is basically just a 10% chance to deal a little bit of damage back to an enemy if they punch us, so there's no reason not to take it as a melee build. Especially since we are a ghoul melee build. Because we're a ghoul, we like radiation. Radiation heals us. Every time Unstable Isotope procs, that's going to deal a little bit of radiation damage back to us, which in turn heals us. So that's just a nice little synergy there. It's nothing crazy, it's not going to make or break your build if you don't use it, but it is going to be a nice little helping hand for keeping you stocked up on radiation. And now we're going to take a look at the weapons. So obviously this is an unarmed build. The best unarmed weapon in the game, categorically speaking, is the Industrial Gauntlet. You get this from the Settlers in the Wastelanders expansion. And the best legendary effects that we will be utilizing as a ghoul is going to be Furious, Heavy Hitters, Strength, and Pounders. Pounders and Furious are going to synergize very well there. Every punch you deal is going to give you 15% extra damage, and that will max out at 19 attacks. which if you are fighting a boss enemy, that will lead you to deal 285% more damage on that boss if you reach the max 19 stacks. And obviously we'll be using the power attack secondary effect because we want every attack we do to be a power attack. So 40% extra damage on top of that is going to be incredible. And obviously +3 strength is going to just bolster our damage even more so. More strength equals more damage. This, in my opinion, would be the ideal set of legendary effects to aim for your fisting, punching, unarmed weapon. And if you do decide to use an auto axe, that will change things up a little bit. You're still going to have high AP regen, and you're not going to get any glow back with Rad Reaver, but that won't really matter since you'll be killing everything in the blink of an eye. Auto axes are extremely powerful in the current meta. I know I've seen all the videos of people killing bosses in just a few seconds with these things. You can do that with this build. However, I find a lot more enjoyment in using an unarmed variant. Just punching everything in the wasteland. I think it's more fun and a little bit more of a challenge. But having said that, obviously I recommend these same legendary effects if you do decide to go the auto axe route. Okay, and now the tricky part that will probably be for a lot of you people building this build. Armor. So, armor's tricky for a ghoul because we don't want any rad resistance, but we also want a high amount of other resistances. So that led me down to the path of picking Thorn Armor, funnily enough. I don't normally pick Thorn Armor for melee builds, but Thorn Armor has no rad resistance, and it also gives us a little bit of bleed attack damage, so let's try it out. And in my testing, I have been finding that it's working very, very well. So the less radiation resistance that we have, the more our glow gets satiated and gets regenerated with our toxic goo. Right now I've only got 15 rad resistance due to the under armor, but that's totally fine. Anyway, a full set of Thorn Armor, as you can see, is what I am going to be using. And that will give me a few benefits, mainly the extra bleed damage effect. So every time we punch an enemy, we're going to be dealing 125 damage over 5 seconds, which is quite potent. And every time we get attacked, we bounce back 250 bleed damage over 10 seconds onto the enemy, which is also quite potent. We're only really using this for its lack of radiation properties and also for the use of bleed damage. Now, obviously, you could go with any armor you want that doesn't have rad resistance. You could go with heavy leather, heavy combat armor, heavy metal, or you could just say, screw it, and go with Secret Service or Brotherhood Recon and just make do with the radiation resistance and just chug a few extra toxic goos or shoot a few extra gamma cells with the gamma gun. It's totally up to you, but this is what I recommend so far for this build. And on top of that, for all of the legendary effects, I recommend a full set of a matching set of Vanguards. Since we are full health, Vanguards is the only one that will make sense and actually really work for us as a ghoul. Overeaters doesn't work for ghouls since we don't have hunger and thirst. That doesn't leave us with many powerful options except for Vanguards. So a full set of that will give us 175 extra damage and energy resistance, which is pretty nice. From there, we want a full set to have the +2 second star effect. Like I said before, more strength equals more damage. Now, you can change that to the AP regeneration effect if you find yourself running out of AP a little bit more often than you'd like to. I think that the AP regen on this build is just fine. It works through the entirety of a boss battle. If I run out a little bit, I can just pop a buff, or I can just step back and let it regen and then get straight back into the fight. I prefer personally to have a little bit more damage per attack than to regen slightly faster, but that's a personal preference. You might decide the other option. On top of that, we will be taking Cavaliers on every piece of armor. This is -5% damage taken while sprinting. Obviously, when we're in regular areas, we're going to be running and sprinting from enemy to enemy, back to back, always sprinting as a melee build, so every time we're sprinting, we're going to be taking 25% less damage. In boss battles, the opposite is true. We're going to be standing still in one spot most of the time, punching the same heavily armored, very healthy enemy. So in boss battles, maybe take a second set of armor that has sentinels. That's totally up to you. I don't think it's a must-have. I think that you can do just fine with Cavaliers. And from there, I recommend a full set of Bruisers. More damage, that's the only reason I've picked Bruisers. 5% more damage on every single piece. I know it doesn't work out to be that much of an extra boost all in all, but I didn't find any of the other 4-star options to be that valuable or useful for a Ghoul melee build. As for the modifications on the armor, we want the full entire set to be upgraded to polymer, so that gives us more damage and energy resistance. On both of your legs, we will want to have the ultra light build, gives us a little bit more AP to work with. On the chest, we want dense for more explosive resistance. And then on your arms, on one arm, we want brawling to give us 10% more unarmed damage. And then on the other arm, we want to have weighted, 10% more melee armor penetration. Now I've seen the math, it works out that having one weighted and one brawling will net you more damage. So make sure you do that. As for what Under Armour I'm wearing, I have the shielded Secret Service Under Armour. Like I said, I know it gives me 15 rad resistance. That doesn't seem to matter too much at the moment, but the +4 to strength and +4 to endurance is very valuable, so it is worth the trade-off in my opinion. As for backpacks, right now I'm running an armor-plated backpack, just because I don't really need to carry stimpaks or any chems or anything, so I don't need to use my regular chemist's backpack, so I decided to switch it out for armor-plated, make me a little bit more tanky, and we still get that 30 extra carry weight bonus as well. And finally for the build, let's talk about buffs. So, for our AP, obviously there's always canned coffee, you can spam the hell out of that and get AP regeneration in an instant. It also gives us a little bit of rads, so that's nice. You have company tea, which gives you AP regeneration over a duration of time, and since both of these can be generated at your camp, they're both fairly easy to get your hands on. Players will often be selling them as well. Next up, we also have sunshine oil. This is just a better option, however you do have to craft it and go out of your way. It gives you more AP, and it also gives you damage resistance. So yeah, sunshine oil is fantastic to keep your AP fully stocked up. And finally, we do have fried deer skins. It's not the best option out there, but as a carnivore, it's one of your only AP regeneration options. You'll also want to be taking pemmican. This will give you +6 endurance, which is going to make you just a little bit harder to kill. And for damage output, we will want to be taking Deathclaw Wellington, which will give us +6 strength for even more melee damage, Tasty Mutant Hound Stew, or Tasty Yaoguai Roast, both of which give us the same melee damage buff. It's just whatever you find easier to craft. That being 170% extra melee damage, which is just incredible. And obviously the values for all of these food-related buffs will increase if you're on a team, thanks to Stranger Numbers, boosting the Carnivore mutation. Now, normally I would recommend a chem for the buffs, but we're a feral build, so as of right now, we don't want to be taking any chems because that will make us not feral, and then we will lose that 150% extra melee bonus damage, and that is not good. We want to keep that. So, as tempting as it might be to pop a psycho buff, or anything like that to get an extra amount of damage, it's going to be shooting yourself in the foot in the long run, so don't do it, don't pop any chems. And while we can't take chems, additional buffs you can take are alcohol, that being Vintage Nuka Shine, that will give you a massive buff to your unarmed damage, or you could just simply take whiskey or Nuka Cola Dark if you want to increase your strength with either of those options, using perks like Party Boy and Cola Nut. As for magazines, you can boost your melee damage with Grognak the Barbarian 1, or boost your unarmed and knife damage with the US Covert Operation Manual. As for bobbleheads, you can just use the strength one, or the unarmed one, or the melee one. And last but certainly not least, you can use camp objects and allies. Normally the best camp ally for melee builds would be Maul, but since he gives you a bit of rad resistance, I'm not going to recommend him for ghouls, so that's just something you should take note of. So in my opinion, that would possibly move up Joey Bello to be the best camp ally buff to take, since it reduces your staggers and reduces the damage from incoming forms of damage like fire, melee, and explosions. As for camp objects, you can use the weight bench to increase your strength, and musical instruments to increase your AP regen by 25%. And there we are guys, this is the first iteration of my Radzerker Ghoul melee build. I'm sure over time I will improve on it and update the build, but until then, it's been a lot of fun. The Ghoul Within update has certainly changed the game for the better, allowing the players to experiment with all new playstyles and abilities with the new Ghoul playable race. And I can't wait to see what else we the players will be able to get our hands on down the line. Once again, a huge shout out to Bethesda for sponsoring this video. It's incredible that I have the opportunity to do stuff like this, and it's all thanks to you guys that watch and support the channel. Final notes before ending off the video: the Radzerker is an exceptionally powerful unarmed variation build and does stand on its own two legs when compared to my human, bloodied Queen Killer unarmed build. The Radzerker just has so much going for it and everything just synergizes in a beautiful way. You're essentially unkillable so long as you keep your glow bar maintained, either by hotkeying your radiation consumable of choice or by inflicting rads on yourself via the gamma gun. On top of the survivability, the Radzerker really just packs a superheated, glowing punch, able to put down all regular enemies in a single attack, and everything else falls soon thereafter. Not to mention the exceedingly high ramping damage potential we get when facing bosses due to our stacks of onslaught, glow abilities, and the new tenderizer change. Whether you're using the unarmed attacks, which I recommend personally being the most fun way to play this build, or if you're using the auto axe, you're going to have a great time slicing and dicing, smashing heads, and just punching your way through the wasteland. I love this build and I hope you guys do too. Stay tuned and stick around on the channel for more build videos and more Ghoul Within content in the future. Let's roll the outro. That's going to do it for me. A massive shout out to all of my channel members. You're all legends and thank you for your continued support on the channel. If you like what I do here and you'd like to support me further, then consider becoming a member or check out my merch store. We've got a lot of great designs and benefits, so be sure to check that out in the description. And while you're down there, chuck me a follow on my other social medias and join my Discord. Subscribe if you're new and like the video if you've enjoyed. I've been Tia, and I'll catch us in the next one. Welcome to Valhalla.